Nimrod's bio begins in the 23rd century BCE with King Sargon of Akkad and his grandson Naram-Sin. Following the Great Flood, which destroys all of humanity except the family of Noah, Genesis 10 represents a family tree in the form of a branch or segmented genealogy, tracing the 70 female descendants of Noah's 3 sons, Japheth, Ham and Shem. Many of the names of these descendants are names of nations, tribes, lands and cities known to us from elsewhere in the Bible and from extra-biblical sources: Yavan, Madai, Ashkenaz, Cush, Mizraim, Canaan, and so forth. Accordingly, scholars refer to this chapter as the Table of Nations. Generally speaking, the descendants of Japheth mostly represent nations and lands that are situated northeast, north and northwest of the land of Israel. The descendants of the Ham represent nations that are situated in its south, while the descendants of Shem are mostly situated to the east of the land of Israel, making the land of Israel into the center of the world. The geographical and ethnic focus of the list is accentuated in the closing verse of each section, and the chapter ends with Genesis 10:32. These are the groupings of Noah's descendants according to their origins by their nations, and from these the nations branch out over the earth. After the flood, the picture that emerges uniquely in the ancient world is all of humanity as a single extended family. Many scholars would assign its score to the priestly source of the Pentateuch due to its language and literary style, and the function it serves in the primeval narrative. Nimrod the Hunter, a digression from the nations list. The Table of Nations has 2 digressions that appear to be supplements. One is brief, which the NJPS translation puts in parentheses and outlines the borders of Canaan. The other is much more extensive, comprised of 5 verses about Nimrod, beginning with Genesis 10:8. And Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty man on earth. A number of phrases in the passage are difficult to interpret. Gibor, the noun, could mean anything from giant to hero to mighty man or warrior to champion to man of power or to potentate. Bares, this could be translated on earth, giving Nimrod's might universal significance, or in the land, in the sense of his country, making him a local hero. Beginning to be mighty, verse 8 tells us that Nimrod, the word means began, but he began to be mighty makes little sense in this context. The NRSV translates, he was the first on earth to become a mighty warrior, suggesting a role for him similar to Jubal, and Tubal-Cain, fathers of all herders, musicians, and metalworkers, in Genesis 4:20-22, namely the originators of these professions. The idea of his being the founder of some profession works even better with the opening of the next verse, which describes him as a mighty hunter, perhaps making him the first hunter. Genesis 10:9, he was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. This Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh, is never mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. The anecdote then shifts from describing Nimrod as a hunter to a king. Nimrod's kingdom begins in southern Mesopotamia. Verse 10 describes Nimrod establishing his kingdom in southern Mesopotamia. Genesis 10:10. The beginning of his kingdom was Babylon and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. The land of Shinar is mentioned 7 times in the Bible. In Genesis, the Tower of Babel was built in a valley in the land of Shinar, and Shinar is the home of King Amraphel. In Genesis 14:1-9, the name of Shinar refers to southern Mesopotamia, more or less equivalent to the Mesopotamian Sumer and Akkad, in which almost all the cities listed are found. Babylon is the capital of the empire which would eventually destroy Judah. It is in southern Mesopotamia. Akkad is mentioned in the Bible only here. It refers to the city of Akkad, which was capital of the Sargonic dynasty's empire in the late 24th to early 21st centuries BCE. The ancient Semitic language Akkadian is named after this city. Erech is also mentioned only here, although Erechovites are listed together with the Babylonians, Sussanites, and Alamites. In an Aramic letter quoted in Ezra 4:9, this likely refers to the well-known city of Uruk, one of the oldest and most prominent of the Sumerian cities.
fortified by none other than the legendary Gilgamesh. The location of Kalne is a mystery. A city named Kalne is mentioned in Amos 6:2. In Isaiah 10:9, it is spelled Kalno. These texts, however, refer to a place in northern Syria rather than southern Mesopotamia. A tradition preserved in the Babylonian Talmud Yoma 10a identifies Kalne with Nofer-Ninfe, perhaps referring to Nippur. About halfway between Uruk and Babylon, this would work well here. In 1944, William Foxwell Albright suggested that the empty vocalization should be amended to "and they were all." The verse would then read Babylon and Erech and Akkad, and they were all in the land of Shinar. Many but not all scholars and translators have accepted this attractive amendation. Since there is no agreed identification for Kalne, this proposal may be correct. Nimrod goes north. Verses 11 to 12 then describe Nimrod moving from the region of Shinar to northern Mesopotamia. Genesis 10:11. From that land he built Nineveh and Rehoboth and Kala 10:12 and Rezin between Nineveh and Kala. That is the great city. Ashur could refer to the ancient city that served as the original capital of the Assyrian Empire. Nevertheless, this is the city not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible, and it seems more likely that this term is parallel to the land of Shinar in the preceding verse and refers to the land of Assyria in general. Nineveh was the last and best known capital of Assyria from about 700 BCE to its destruction in 612. It is mentioned multiple times in the Bible. Rehoboth-Ir remains a mystery. The name means something like plazas of the city. There are several places called Rehob or Rehoboth and the like in the Bible, but no such place is known in Assyria. Kala, near today's Mosul in northern Iraq, was the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire from the reign of Ashur-Nasirpal II until about 706. Rezin may be a reference to a city that served as the capital of Assyria for a very brief time, during the reign of Sargon II, who ruled from 722 to 705 and who destroyed Samaria. Sargon II built his own capital called Dur-Sarukin, fortress of Sargon, present-day Khorshabad, near a place called Rezene, modern Rasalan, in the same region. The late Victor Avigdor Hurowitz suggested that this was none other than Rezin. It is unclear what the great city refers to. The syntax suggests Rezin, but as Jonah 1:2, 3:2-3, 4:11 suggest, from the biblical perspective, Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire at the height of its power, was truly the great city. In some, verses 8 to 12 tell the story of a mighty hunter hero king who began his reign in the ancient great cities of southern Mesopotamia and continued from there to the great cities of Assyria in northern Mesopotamia. The dissonance between the Nimrod passage and its context. The Nimrod passage interrupts the genealogy of Ham, which continues in verse 12. Moreover, the verses seem to diverge from the structure of the larger genealogical list. It focuses on one individual and that cities he founded, not on the sons he begat. Finally, the geographic picture it represents is problematic. As noted, Shinar is in southern Mesopotamia and Ashur in northern Mesopotamia, all in Shemitic territory. Cush, however, ostensibly Nimrod's father, like other descendants of Ham, represented the well-known land of Cush, also known as Nubia, the Septuagints, Ethiopia, roughly today's Sudan. How are we to make sense of this? Critical scholarship is almost unanimous in the assessment that verses 8:12 were taken from a different source than the preceding and following verses. Most scholars would assign verses 1 to 7 and 13 to 32, the priestly school, and verses 8 to 12 to the J source. This suggests that we may explain the Nimrod narrative independently of the surrounding table of nations. This leaves us with two questions. What was its original meaning, and why was it linked to the genealogy of Cush? Why is a Cushite in Mesopotamia? There are three possible explanations for the connection between Nimrod and Cush. Number 1. A Cushite in Mesopotamia. Some argue that the Nimrod the hunter figure indeed has a Cushite or Nubian background, and they try to make the biblical text fit that interpretation in some way. Number 2. Artificial connection. It is possible that Nimrod originally had nothing to do with Cush, but that the scribe who inserted this J text into P, or a letter scribe, added him as a Cush sons to anchor the Nimrod story to the larger context of begats. Number 3. Crossing Cushes. A third option interprets that Cush in verse 8, Nimrod's father, not as Nubia, but as place in Mesopotamia. For instance, in his classic treatment of the subject, Ephraim A. Spicer identified Nimrod's Cush with the Iranian people that we call the Kassites, who ruled Babylonia from the 16th to the 12th centuries BCE. According to this, whoever inserted the J tradition into its present place mistakenly conflated the two. This final option, that is a Mesopotamian Cush, is embraced by most scholars and is likely correct. Identifying Nimrod. We know of no ancient Mesopotamian figure, mythic or historical, named Nimrod. Thus, scholars have struggled to identify who the biblical authors are describing. The cities that Nimrod founds do not point to any historical period. Some of these cities did not even exist at the same time. Uruk was one of the oldest cities in the world and remained an important place throughout antiquity. Akkad, on the other hand, was founded in the 24th century and destroyed in the 21st century. Kala and Nineveh only rose to prominence in the 9th century and were destroyed in the late 7th, and Dur-Sarukin was even shorter-lived, thriving only a handful of years in the 8th century. Thus, some scholars have suggested that Nimrod is based on a legendary god or demigod, such as the Sumerian gods Ninurta or Nergal, or the Babylonian Marduk, all of whom were renowned as great hunters, which the biblical versions humanized. Others have equated Nimrod with legendary Mesopotamian heroes such as Gilgamesh. Spicer, however, correctly notes that despite the epic aspects of the biblical story, there is no textual evidence of Nimrod's being anything other than mortal. I suggest that instead of trying to explain all the details of the verses, we consider the larger picture of Mesopotamian ruler that the biblical passage is trying to convey. For this, we need to look back to a very ancient Mesopotamian figure as far back as the 23rd century BCE, the king of Cush. The mid-3rd millennium BCE was a time of great change in Mesopotamia. After several centuries of rivalry between various Sumerian city-states such as Ur, Uruk, Lagash and Umma, the rulers of the city of Cush managed to establish supremacy for much of southern Mesopotamia. This was the first time one Sumerian city succeeded in doing this. In successive generations, the little king of Cush would come to mean a divinely authorized ruler over all of Sumer and would be claimed at different times by the rulers of various cities. Use of the title king of Cush implied being victorious at war, a righteous judge, and a builder of cities. Cush, I would argue, is the basis of the Cush of the Nimrod passage, the first Semitic-speaking emperor. Legend has it that Sargon, the man who would become what some would call history's first emperor, was born in the town of Azipiranu on the Euphrates. At birth, his priestess mother hid him in a basket of rushes, which she then set afloat on the river. The basket floated to Cush, where he was adopted by Aki, the gardener, eventually becoming cupbearer to Ur-Zababa, king of Cush. Somehow he managed to become the king and expanded his rule over all of southern Mesopotamia, pushing north the conqueror Mari, Abla, Ashur and Nineveh, and even reaching Anatolia and the Mediterranean. At some point, he moved his capital to the previously known city of Akkad, adding the title King of Sumer and Akkad to his previous designation King of Cush. We do not know this person's birth name, but as king he adopted the throne name Sarukin, which in the Eastern Semitic language that came to be known as Akkadian means the true king, indicating that some people doubted his legitimacy. In English, he is known as Sargon, following the conventional biblical spelling. Sargon was the first non-Semitic speaking Mesopotamian ruler to adapt the Sumerian cuneiform script to his own language, and he reigned over a vast territory for 56 years. Nimrod's depiction is based on Sargon. Both Nimrod and Sargon began their reigns in Sumer, Shinar, building Akkad in Babylonian, and continuing north to Assyria. Both were credited with extraordinary prowess. Both were considered to be the first post-Diluvians to wield royal power. Thus, Sargon is likely to figure behind Nimrod, though as we will see, he has been amalgamated with his grandson Naram-Sin. Naram-Sin Sargon's grandson. Sargon was succeeded by his sons Reumish and Manishtushu, and then by Manishtushu's son Naram-Sin. Naram-Sin ruled for 36 years. He survived a rebellion led by the city of Cush and then restored the empire. Naram-Sin, besides appointing himself the new deity of the city of Akkad, resurrected the bureaucracy, economy and defenses of the kingdom and was known as a patron of the arts. He was also the first to adopt the title Saru Kibratim Arbaim, king of the four corners of the earth. Naram-Sin was succeeded by his son Shar-Kali-Shari, and during his reign the empire fell apart. A few additional Akkadian rulers are known, but they were no longer powerful emperors, and the city of Akkad was eventually abandoned and lost. By the time the Bible was written, the kingdom of Akkad had been gone for more than a millennium. So how did this amalgamated character of Nimrod enter the Bible? Sargon and Naram-Sin. In later historiography, we know very little about the historical Sargon or Naram-Sin, but to the Mesopotamian literati of the late Babylonian and Neo-Assyrian periods, the age of Sargon and Naram-Sin was one of the important stages in human history. According to the Sumerian king list, after the flood, kingship came down from heaven and was granted to the city of Cush. Over 1,000 years after the Akkadian Empire collapsed, the Neo-Assyrian kings used Sargon's royal title of Sar-Kisati, taking it to mean quite literally king of the universe. Most strikingly, Sargon's Neo-Assyrian namesake Sargon II had his full title, the Great King, the Mighty King, King of the Universe, King of Assyria, King of Babylon, King of Sumer and Akkad, inscribed on numerous inscriptions all over his royal palaces. In short, to people of the second and first millennia B.C.E., the great myths and legends of the past tales of the flood of Etana, the shepherd, the struggle between Aga of Cush and Gilgamesh of Uruk, and the ascension of Sargon and Naram-Sin were important history. The same was true for the Canaanites and the Israelites, living in the second and first millennia B.C.E. at the other end of the Fertile Crescent. Sargon in the Levant. Although our knowledge of the West Semitic versions of the primeval history are extremely limited, it is clear from the few sources we do have that Western and Eastern Semitic traditions shared many common elements. The similarity was due initially to the common origin of all Semitic peoples. During later periods, the different versions would be occasionally updated through continuous contact between Mesopotamia and the Levant. Hittite versions of the Sargon and Naram-Sin accounts have been found in Anatolia, increasing Assyrian and Babylonian influence and eventually domination of Syria and Israel during the 9th through 6th centuries would have influenced the written biblical version of the story. The ancient Hebrews, like their Mesopotamian counterparts, probably had their own version of the bringing down of kingship after the flood. At some early age, stories of the great king Sarukin of Cush, who ruled Shinar and Akkad and even conquered Assyria and her cities, reached the Levant, as proven by the version found at El-Amarna, Egypt. Apparently, time and distance blended the names and deeds of Sargon and his almost as famous grandson Naram-Sin, whose name was corrupted in the biblical account from Naram to Nimrod. The author of the J source may very well have known a longer, epic poem, which he condensed. Israeli tradition made the hero a mighty hunter before Yahweh, but retained his rule as the original human monarch. A Neo-Assyrian period updating. The Hebrew Nimrod tradition may have indeed been updated by the addition of cities like Kala and Rezin, ruled by the more recent Sargon, the second Assyrian king to take that name. The Assyrian monarch might have even chose this throne name to use the comparison for propaganda purposes. The Nimrod tradition is known by the 8th century Judite prophet Micah, who referred to the land of Nimrod when predicting the future destruction of Assyria. Mic 5:5, who will shepherd Assyrian's land with swords, the land of Nimrod in its gates. Thus he will deliver us from Assyria, should it invade our land and should it trample our country. No other prophet, however, uses this designation. The loss of Nimrod's story. The compilers of the Table of Nations included Nimrod as one of the typological 70 descendants of Noah. Later Jewish tradition, nothing the fact that Shinar appears both in relation to Nimrod and in the Tower of Babel story makes Nimrod the builder of the tower and understands him as the archetypical evil king. His wickedness was understood to inhere in his very name, derived from the verb to rebel. Instead of a great hunter before Yahweh, he became the ultimate rebel against God. The biblical Nimrod, however, is neither a wicked king nor even a character unique to Israelite historiography. Instead, he is the composite Hebrew equivalent of the Sargonic dynasty's two most famous kings of Cush, Sargon, the first Semitic emperor, and his grandson, Naram-Sin. The later editors of the book of Genesis dropped much of the story and mistakenly identified the Mesopotamian Cush with the Hamitic Cush. The Nimrod tradition was thus lost, save for 5 verses in Genesis 10.
If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to us and hitting the like button. Feel free to write a comment below and suggest which theory you want to see next. If you'd like to further support this channel, please consider joining. Our membership link will be found in the description box below. We appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for watching.